Tonight we come to an ordinary town on an ordinary day. A bright, busy, perfectly unremarkable day that happens to be one of the last this town will ever see. The people around us have no idea. That is the strange weight of this night. We know what is coming, and they do not. And so we walk among them gently, watching them live their final day in a town that is about to become the most famous lost city in the world. The town is Pompeii. It sits in the south of Italy, near the Bay of Naples, in the full height of the Roman Empire. A prosperous, sun-warmed Roman town of perhaps 12,000 people, going about its business beneath a clear sky. And rising behind it, green and gorgeous and utterly peaceful, is a mountain called Vesuvius. The people of Pompeii love that mountain. Its lower slopes are covered with their vineyards and farms. Its soil is rich and dark and gives wonderful wine. They build their houses in its shadow, and they have never once feared it, because as far as anyone in Pompeii knows, it is simply a mountain, a beautiful, ordinary mountain. Not one of them has any idea that it is a volcano. Not one of them even truly has the concept. It has slept for so many centuries that no living memory connects it to fire. So let us walk into Pompeii on its last ordinary day and see how the Romans really lived: the streets, the shops, the baths, the bread still warm in the ovens. Because all of it, every small human detail, is about to be frozen in time and preserved for 2,000 years. And the best way to understand what was lost is to first see it alive. Come into the town through one of its gates, and the noise and life of it surrounds you at once. The streets are paved with great blocks of grey stone, worn into deep ruts by generations of cartwheels, and at the crossings there are high stepping stones, so you can cross without putting your feet in the muck that runs down the street, with gaps just wide enough for the cartwheels to roll between. Fountains splash at the corners, fed by the town's water system, and people gather there to fill jugs and gossip. The streets are narrow, crowded, loud, vendors calling, carts rumbling, donkeys braying, the whole press of a busy Roman town on a working day. The walls are covered in writing. This is one of the things that makes Pompeii so astonishing once it is found. The Romans wrote on everything. Election notices painted in red, urging citizens to vote for this candidate or that. Advertisements for upcoming games at the amphitheater. Notices of rooms to let. And everywhere, scratched into the plaster by ordinary hands, the graffiti of ordinary people, lovers' names, rude jokes, boasts, insults, complaints, lines of poetry, a child's practice alphabet, someone simply recording that they had been there. 2,000 years later, we can still read them. Someone praising a barmaid, someone mocking a friend, someone declaring their love, someone grumbling that the wine was watered down. The voices of perfectly ordinary people, caught mid-sentence and preserved forever. Everywhere, the town is at its work. Step into a bakery and the heat hits you, and the smell of it, the great round millstones turning, the bread being shaped, the domed brick ovens glowing. In one bakery, this very day, loaves of bread are placed in the oven to bake. They will never be taken out. They will be found 2,000 years later, carbonized black but perfectly preserved, still sitting in the oven where the baker left them, scored into the wedges the Romans liked, even stamped with the baker's name. A batch of bread that has been waiting in the oven for 2 millennia. There are shops of every kind lining the streets, their fronts open to the road, workshops where cloth is dyed in great vats, a fuller's where wool is cleaned and pressed, a shop selling lamps, a maker of fine bronze. There are taverns and snack bars on nearly every corner, counters of stone set with deep round jars, where you can buy a quick hot meal or a cup of wine, the Roman equivalent of fast food, the counters stained and worn by daily use. There is a market in the Forum, the great open public square at the heart of the town, ringed with temples and grand public buildings, where merchants sell fish and produce, and the business of the town is done beneath the open sky, with Vesuvius framed serenely behind the columns. And Pompeii knew how to enjoy itself. At the heart of Roman daily life were the baths, and Pompeii had several grand ones, vast complexes where people of all classes came each afternoon not just to wash, but to socialize, exercise, relax, and pass the hours. You would move through a sequence of rooms: a warm room, a hot steamy room, a cold plunge, the floors and walls heated by hot air flowing through hollow spaces beneath and within them, a marvel of engineering. The baths were where the town gathered, gossiped, did business, and idled away the warm afternoons in steam and conversation, and the splash of water on marble. There was an amphitheater at the edge of town, one of the oldest in the whole Roman world, where crowds packed in to watch gladiators fight, roaring from the stone seats. There were theaters for plays. There were grand houses, the homes of the wealthy, hidden behind plain street walls, but opening within onto beautiful courtyards and gardens with fountains and pools. Their walls painted floor to ceiling with exquisite frescoes. Gardens, gods, landscapes, scenes of myth, so vivid and fresh that when they are uncovered 2,000 years later, the colors will still glow. And there were the smaller, cruder pleasures too, the taverns thick with smoke and dice, the brothels with their painted walls, all the ordinary human appetites of a living town, all of it going on this day, exactly as it had gone on for generations. And over all of it, beautiful in the afternoon light, stood the mountain. This is the thing the people of Pompeii could not know, the knowledge we carry that they lacked. Vesuvius was not a dead mountain. It was a sleeping one, a volcano that had lain quiet for so many hundreds of years that all memory of its fire had faded completely from the minds of the people living on its slopes. They had no records of it erupting. They had no folklore of it as a mountain of fire. They had built a thriving civilization right up against its flanks, planted its slopes with vines, raised their children in its shadow, in total, peaceful ignorance of what slept beneath it. Deep below the green and pleasant mountain, under tremendous pressure, a vast reservoir of molten rock and gas had been building for centuries, straining toward the surface, and the people drinking wine in the taverns and bathing in the baths and scratching their names on the walls had no idea they were living on the lid of it. There had been warnings of a kind, if anyone had known how to read them. Years before, a powerful earthquake had struck the region and badly damaged Pompeii. Temples cracked, buildings toppled, and the town was still rebuilding even now, scaffolding here and there among the houses. The Romans knew earthquakes. They did not connect them to the mountain. And in the days right before this last day, there had been more tremors, small ones, shaking the ground now and then. And the springs and wells had begun, strangely, to dry up. But earthquakes were common in this land, and no one was alarmed. The people of Pompeii felt the ground shiver, shrugged, and went on with their day. They finished their work. They went to the baths. They put bread in the ovens. They scratched their names on the walls. They had no reason in the world to believe that this ordinary, sunlit, unremarkable day was the last one their town would ever know. But the mountain was waking, and tomorrow, a little after noon, it was going to tear itself open and bury all of this: the streets, the shops, the baths, the bread in the ovens, the names on the walls, and thousands of the people themselves, under the sky turned to fire and stone. It began a little after noon, on an autumn day, with a sound unlike anything the people of Pompeii had ever heard. Far beneath the mountain, the molten rock finally forced its way up through the last barrier of stone, and Vesuvius blew its top open in a single titanic explosion. A column of ash, pumice, and gas blasted out of the mountain and shot straight up into the sky, not drifting, not billowing, but rocketing upward with unbelievable force, climbing miles into the air in minutes, until it stood like an enormous pillar over the bay, far higher than any mountain, spreading out flat at the top where it could rise no further into a vast, dark canopy. A man watching from across the bay would describe it, decades later, in the first detailed account of such an eruption ever written, as looking like a great umbrella pine tree, a tall trunk of cloud rising up and then spreading into branches at the top. His name was Pliny, and because of his careful description, eruptions of this exact violent kind are still called Plinian to this day. In Pompeii, almost directly downwind, the people stopped what they were doing and looked up at the monstrous thing standing in the sky over their beloved mountain, and they did not understand what they were seeing. There was no word for it in their world. They watched the great dark pillar climb and spread and blot out the sun, and the bright autumn afternoon began, impossibly, to turn to twilight, and then toward night in the middle of the day. Then it began to fall. The vast cloud, carried by the wind, drifted out over Pompeii, and out of it came the rain, not water, but stone. First a fine grey ash, sifting down like dirty snow, coating everything, getting into the eyes and the throat. And then, as the eruption intensified, pumice, light, frothy chunks of volcanic rock, some small as gravel, some large as a fist, began to pelt down out of the darkening sky, faster and faster, until it was hammering down on the town in a relentless, rattling hail of stone. It clattered on the roof tiles, piled in the streets, drifted against the walls. And it did not stop. Hour after hour it fell, and the pumice began to pile up, inches, then feet, burying the streets, weighing on the rooftops, climbing steadily up the sides of the buildings. Now the people of Pompeii faced their terrible choice, the choice that would decide whether they lived or died, made in the dark and the falling stone with no understanding of what was happening or what was still to come. Some chose to flee, to gather what they could carry and run for the town gates and the roads out toward the open country or the harbor, hoping to get clear of the rain of stone. And many of those who left early in the first hours, while the roads were still passable and the falling pumice was still survivable, lived. They walked out of Pompeii into the strange, dark afternoon and kept going, and they survived. And we owe much of what we know to the fact that some got away to remember it. But others chose to stay, and it was not a foolish choice in the moment. Outside, stone was falling from the sky hard enough to knock a person down or crack a skull. Indoors, under a solid roof, you were sheltered from that lethal hail. So many people sheltered in their houses, huddling inside, waiting for it to pass as you would wait out a violent storm, certain it must end soon. They could not know that staying would kill them. They could not know that the pumice piling on their roofs would grow heavy enough to collapse them, trapping those beneath. And they could not know about the far deadlier thing that was still coming in the dark hours before dawn. Across the bay, the same Pliny whose nephew would write it all down was watching, and he was not an ordinary man. He was the commander of the Roman fleet stationed across the water, and a famous scholar with a boundless curiosity about the natural world. When he saw the extraordinary cloud rising over Vesuvius, his first instinct was to sail toward it to observe it more closely. And then a message reached him begging for rescue. People trapped on the shore beneath the mountain with no way out by land. So the old admiral turned a scientific expedition into a rescue mission and ordered the warships launched and sailed directly toward the erupting volcano while everyone else who could was fleeing from it. It was an act of enormous courage, and it cost him his life. He sailed across the bay through the falling ash and floating pumice toward the burning mountain, calm enough, the story goes, to call for his dinner and to sleep, projecting steadiness to keep up the courage of those with him. He landed near the foot of the mountain to help where he could, but the air there was growing thick with ash and sulphurous fumes, and conditions worsened through the night. And in the end, the old man, heavy and asthmatic, was overcome, collapsing on the shore as the poisonous air closed in. and dying there beneath the mountain he had sailed toward out of curiosity and compassion. His nephew, safe across the bay, survived to tell the story, and his account of these 2 days is the only detailed eyewitness record we have of the destruction of Pompeii. A letter written by a frightened young man who watched the world end across the water. Back in Pompeii, the afternoon had become a nightmare of darkness. By now the sun was entirely gone, blotted out by the towering cloud, and the town lay in a darkness deeper than any night. Not the soft dark of evening, but a total, choking blackness, lit only by the lurid glow of the mountain and the flashes of lightning that crackled and forked within the eruption cloud. A strange and terrible lightning born of the ash itself. The pumice kept falling, relentless, the depth of it climbing toward the upper floors of the houses. The air was thick with ash, and the stench of sulfur hard to breathe. The ground shuddered with earthquakes, and through this hellish dark, those who had stayed too long now tried, many of them, to flee at last, stumbling out into streets buried knee-deep, waist-deep in shifting pumice, carrying lamps that barely pierced the blackness, clutching their children and whatever treasures they had snatched up, trying to feel their way toward gates and roads they could no longer see. The young man across the bay described the same darkness falling over his own town, miles away. People calling out for one another in the black, parents and children unable to find each other, some praying for death, some convinced the world itself was ending and the gods had abandoned it, the whole of creation seeming to dissolve into ash and darkness. For the people of Pompeii, much closer to the mountain, it was worse, and it was not over. They had survived the reign of stone. They had endured the long, terrible dark. Many were still alive as the night wore on toward morning, frightened, exhausted, half-buried, but alive. And it was just then, in the dead black hours before dawn, that the mountain did the thing that would kill them all at once. For hours, the great column of ash had been blasting straight up out of Vesuvius, holding itself up by the sheer force of the eruption. But a column like that can only hold as long as the force beneath it stays strong enough to support its colossal weight. And in the black hours before dawn, the eruption faltered for a moment, and the unthinkable weight of that miles-high pillar of rock and ash could no longer be held up, and it collapsed. When it fell, it did not drift gently back to earth. It came down as an avalanche, a boiling, ground-hugging cloud of superheated gas, ash, and rock, far hotter than boiling water that poured down the slopes of the mountain at the speed of a hurricane. Volcanologists call it a pyroclastic surge, a searing, dense, fast-moving cloud that races along the ground, incinerating and burying everything in its path, impossible to outrun and impossible to survive. This was the true killer. The rain of stone had been survivable for many. This was not survivable for anyone it reached. The first of these burning clouds rushed down the other side of the mountain, toward a smaller, wealthier town nestled right at the foot of Vesuvius on the coast, Herculaneum. Herculaneum had been spared the worst of the falling pumice, because the wind had carried that toward Pompeii instead. Its people may even have believed they were the lucky ones. Many had gathered down by the waterfront, sheltering in a row of stone boat chambers along the shore, waiting for rescue by sea, clustered together in the dark with their valuables, hoping for ships. But Herculaneum was directly in the path of the first great surge. The burning cloud came down the mountain and over the town in moments, and the heat of it was so extraordinary, so instant, that it killed everyone it touched in an instant, too fast for suffering, faster than fear. The town was then buried, not under feet of ash, but under many times that, sealed beneath a vast depth of volcanic material that would harden almost to stone. The people in the boat chambers were found there, centuries later, hundreds of them, huddled together where they had waited for the ships that never came. And then it was Pompeii's turn. The surges came in waves through the night and into the morning, each one racing down the mountain and out across the buried land. The earlier ones may have stopped just short of the town walls, but as the night ended, a great surge swept all the way into Pompeii itself, over the walls, through the buried streets, into the houses and the sheltering places, a wall of scorching gas and ash moving faster than anyone could run. And it reached the thousands of people who had stayed, who had survived the long night of falling stone, who were still alive in their homes and on the roads. And it killed them where they were, in a matter of moments in the dark. This is where we must walk most gently of all, because this is where the people died, and they were people exactly like us, frightened, ordinary, trying to protect the ones they loved. They died in the postures the burning cloud caught them in, and those postures would be preserved, and they tell the story without need of any words. A family found huddled together in a small room, the parents sheltering the children. People found at the edge of town, at the gates, who had so nearly made it out. A person who had stopped to gather coins or jewels, caught with the treasure still in hand. A guard dog left chained that could not flee. People who had climbed to the upper floors to escape the rising pumice, found where the burning air reached them. There was no violence in their final postures. For the most part, no struggle, no flailing. Most simply lay down, or curled up, or held one another, overcome too quickly to do anything but be still. They went, in the end, from terror straight into stillness, in the dark altogether, in a single morning. And then it was over. The eruption spent itself over the following hours, the surges ceasing, the great cloud thinning at last, and when the light finally returned, a sick, grey, ash-filtered light, it fell on a world utterly transformed. Where the bright, busy, crowded town of Pompeii had stood, there was nothing. No streets, no rooftops, no forum, no temples, no people. There was only a vast, smooth, grey plain of ash and pumice, featureless and silent, stretching where the town had been, with the wreckage of Pompeii sealed somewhere beneath it. The whole town had been buried under many feet of volcanic debris, the rooftops gone under, then the upper floors, until only the tops of the tallest buildings, if anything, broke the surface. The shape of the coastline itself had changed, the sea pushed back, the rivers buried. The green and lovely mountain had torn off its own summit and lay diminished and smoking, a different shape against the sky. The young man across the bay emerged from his own ordeal into a landscape buried in grey ash drifted everywhere like snow, the sun pale and weak. The familiar world transformed into something strange and dead. And Pompeii, the town of the bread in the ovens, and the names scratched on the walls, and the painted gardens, and the crowded baths. Pompeii was simply gone. In a single day and night, a living town of 12,000 souls had been erased from the surface of the earth, and thousands of its people sealed where they had fallen, beneath the silent grey plain. The survivors, the ones who had fled in time, are said to have come back in the days afterward, picking over the smooth grey waste, trying to dig down to find their homes, their possessions, the bodies of those they had lost. A few tunneled down to recover what they could, but there was almost nothing to find, and nothing to come back to, and in time they gave it up. There was no rebuilding a town, buried under that much stone. The survivors drifted away to other towns, to make new lives, and Pompeii was left to the silence, sealed, buried, abandoned, and slowly, over the years and then the centuries, forgotten almost completely, until even its location passed out of memory, and the very name became half a legend, a story of a town that had once been somewhere near the mountain, swallowed by the earth. Beneath the grass and the new farms that eventually grew over the buried plain, the town lay perfectly preserved in its tomb of ash. The streets, the houses, the paintings, the bread, the names on the walls, and the people in their last stillness, waiting, in the dark, for a world that had forgotten it even existed to find it again, 17 centuries later. The centuries rolled over the buried town, and the world above it changed completely, while the town beneath did not change at all. The mighty empire that Pompeii had belonged to rose to even greater heights, and then declined and fell. New peoples swept across Italy. The old gods were forgotten, and a new faith spread across the land. Above the sealed town, the ash weathered into rich soil, and grass grew, and then vines and farms, and eventually people built houses and worked the land directly over the rooftops of Pompeii without the faintest idea of what lay a few feet beneath their plows. The location was lost so thoroughly that the very name drifted into confusion. A place name on the land hinted at it, but no one connected it to the great lost town. For nearly 1700 years, Pompeii simply slept beneath the fields, a whole Roman town held perfectly in the dark, while above it the centuries did what centuries do, and no one knew it was there. It was found, in the end, by accident, the way these things so often are. In the early modern age, men digging, first for a water channel, later in deliberate search of buried treasures and statues to adorn the palaces of kings, began to strike worked stone and painted walls deep beneath the ground near the mountain. At first, they hardly understood what they had. The nearby town of Herculaneum was struck first, its discoverers tunneling down through the rock-hard volcanic stone into the buried streets, hauling up statues and marbles. And then, a little later, excavators digging into the buried plain uncovered the unmistakable evidence that here, beneath them, lay the lost town of Pompeii itself. Easier to dig than its neighbor, buried in softer ash rather than stone. What they began to uncover as they dug astonished them and astonished the world, and has never stopped astonishing it since. Because this was not a ruin in the ordinary sense, not a few broken columns and worn foundations, the usual scraps the ancient world leaves behind. This was a whole town, almost entire, frozen at a single instant in time, and preserved beneath its blanket of ash with a completeness that existed nowhere else on Earth. Imagine being among the first to dig down into it, and what came up out of the ash. Whole streets emerged, still paved, still rutted, the stepping stones still in place at the crossings. Houses came up with their walls intact, and on those walls, frescoes, paintings as fresh and bright as the day they were made. Gardens and gods and landscapes and scenes of myth glowing in colors 17 centuries old. Floors of intricate mosaic. Courtyards with their fountains and garden beds, where archaeologists could even find the cavities left by the roots of the actual plants, and replant the gardens exactly as the Romans had kept them. The grand houses of the wealthy, and the cramped rooms of the poor, and everything in between. And the small things were what truly stopped the heart, because they were so human and so ordinary. The carbonized loaves of bread, still in the baker's oven, still scored into wedges, still stamped with his name. Pots still on the stoves, food still on tables, the remains of a final meal. Wine jars on the tavern counters, surgical instruments in a doctor's house, cosmetics and jewelry on a dressing table, coins, lamps, dice, toys, tools, election notices, and rude jokes, and lovers' names still painted and scratched on the walls. An entire civilization's daily life, not its grand monuments and famous men, but the ordinary, unrecorded, everyday existence of ordinary people. The things history almost never preserves, caught and held exactly as it was at midday on the town's last ordinary day. Nowhere else in the world has the daily life of the ancient past been preserved like this. We know more about how ordinary Romans actually lived from this one buried town than from almost anything else that survives. But the most haunting discovery of all came later, and it came from a puzzle. As the excavators dug through the hardened ash, they kept finding strange empty hollows, voids, cavities in the solid material, often with a scatter of bones at the bottom. For a long time, these were just a curiosity. And then, in the 19th century, An archaeologist understood what they were and devised something that would let the dead of Pompeii speak across 2,000 years. The hollows, he realized, were people. When the burning ash had buried the bodies of those who died, it had hardened around them, sealing them in. Over the centuries, the bodies themselves had decayed away to bone, leaving behind a perfect, empty mold in the hardened ash, a cavity in the exact shape of the person in their final moment, down to the folds of their clothing and the expression on their face. So the archaeologist began, carefully, to pour liquid plaster into these voids, let it harden, and then chip away the surrounding ash. And what emerged was a cast, the precise, three-dimensional form of a human being captured in the very instant of their death, 17 centuries before. The casts are among the most powerful and heartbreaking objects in the whole of archaeology, because they are not statues, not art, not idealized images. They are the actual shapes of actual people in their last moments when the burning cloud came. A family lying together, the parents curved protectively around the children, a man lying on his back, one arm raised, a pair of figures with their arms around each other, a person pulling a cloak over their face against the ash, people sitting, lying, curled up, holding one another alone, and the chained guard dog, twisted where it could not escape its leash. They are not grand. They are not heroes. They are ordinary people, caught in the worst moment of their lives, made suddenly and unbearably present to us across an impossible gulf of time, so that we look at them and see not ancient strangers, but people, frightened and tender and human, exactly like ourselves. The eruption that destroyed them is also the thing that preserved them, and gave them, in a terrible way, a kind of immortality. The town that died in a day became, because of how it died, the most vivid window into the ancient world that has ever been found. There is a strange and moving paradox at the very heart of Pompeii, and it is worth sitting with, here at the end. The thing that destroyed the town is the very thing that saved it. Had Vesuvius never erupted, Pompeii would have lived on as an ordinary Roman town. And then, like every other ordinary Roman town, it would have slowly declined, been rebuilt and altered over the centuries, robbed of its stone, plowed under, layered over, until almost nothing of that particular day, that particular life, remained. The daily world of its people, the bread, the graffiti, the painted gardens, the meals on the tables, would have vanished completely, as it has vanished from nearly everywhere else, leaving us to guess at how ordinary Romans really lived. Instead, in a single catastrophic day, that entire ordinary world was sealed and held and carried across 2,000 years to us, perfect and complete. The disaster that ended thousands of lives also made those lives, and that world, immortal. Pompeii died, and because it died the way it did, it can never quite be forgotten again. And what it gives us is something almost no other place in the world can. History, for the most part, remembers the great, the emperors and generals and kings, the famous battles, the grand monuments. It almost never preserves the ordinary, because the ordinary is exactly what time erases first. The meal half-eaten, the joke scratched on a wall, the shop counter worn by daily hands, the toy on the floor, the loaf in the oven. Pompeii preserved all of it. It is a town full of the unremarkable lives that history usually loses entirely. Bakers and barmaids, shopkeepers and slaves, children and dogs, and through it, those ordinary Romans, who expected to be forgotten as all ordinary people are forgotten, speak to us still. We can read their elections and their love notes. We can see the gardens they tended and the gods they painted on their walls. We can stand in their streets and their kitchens and their bathhouses. We know them, these particular, ordinary people of one small town, better than we know almost anyone else from the entire ancient world. And we know them precisely because of the catastrophe that should have erased them forever. And we have, as well, the words of the frightened young man who watched it all from across the bay, the only eyewitness account of the disaster that survives, written in 2 letters years afterward, describing the cloud like an umbrella pine, the falling dark, the panic, the death of his curious and courageous uncle who sailed toward the mountain to save others. Because he wrote it down, and because his words survived along with the buried town, we have both halves of the story: the eyewitness terror of the day and the silent, perfect aftermath beneath the ash. Few events in all of history are preserved so completely, from both the inside and the outside, the living moment and the frozen ruin. There is one more quiet truth in it, and it is the one the people of Pompeii never got to learn. They lived in the shadow of an enormous power they did not understand and did not fear, going about their small and ordinary days, certain that tomorrow would be like every day before it. And they were, almost to the last person, completely unaware that the ground they walked on was anything but solid and safe. We know better than they did, looking back. We know the mountain was never just a mountain, but there is no judgment in that knowledge, only a kind of tenderness, because they were simply living their lives, as everyone does, as we all do, trusting the ground beneath us, never imagining the day would be our last ordinary day. The people of Pompeii are us, caught in a moment we hope never comes for our own towns, and preserved so that we might look at them and feel, across 2,000 years, how precious and how fragile an ordinary day really is. And the mountain is still there. Vesuvius still stands above the bay, green again on its slopes, quiet again, with towns and cities crowded around its feet once more, millions of people living in its shadow, exactly as the people of Pompeii did. It is sleeping as it slept before. It is not dead, but that is a worry for the daylight and for other people on other nights. Tonight it only stands there in the dark over the bay, beautiful and quiet, as it stood on the last ordinary evening before it woke. So let it all grow soft now, and settle, and drift away into the dark. The bright crowded streets of the last ordinary day, the bread in the oven, the names scratched on the walls, the cloud like a great pine tree standing over the bay, and the long dark, and the silence after. The town sleeping under the ash through all the centuries, and rising again at last into the light, with its painted gardens still glowing, and its people still holding one another. Let all of it grow quiet and far away, and let the ordinary, precious, vanished world of that little town rest where it has rested for 2,000 years. You don't have to hold any of it. It has been kept safe for 20 centuries. It will keep until morning. There is nothing left of that long-ago day to fear now, only the quiet, and the ash settling, and the deep stillness over the buried town. So let the streets blur and fade, and let yourself sink down out of the noise and the light into the deep, soft dark below it all, where there are no mountains waking, and no warnings to heed, and nothing in the world that needs you tonight. Rest now. The little town sleeps on beneath the ash, and you may sleep too. And when the dark comes down again, I'll be here to carry you off to another night, long ago, while the wonder of it still stands. Sleep well.